Hey, what's going on? So I'm sitting here and I'm having an epiphany um, that sometimes, especially in relationships, and not when I say relationships, I don't just mean, oh, the person you're dating, but sometimes, friendships, whatever, that we underestimate the connection of energy sometimes. That some energetic connections are temporary and not permanent. And I think that's what creates regret when certain relationships end. So, like when you lose a best friend or you move on from a best friend, um, it is difficult to move on because you struggle with the reality that how can an energetic connection that felt so powerful end, right? Something that felt that powerful must uh, have been meant to have been permanent. Um, and that's not always the case. Some energetic connections are temporary and we try to make them permanent. And because we try to make them permanent, we try to force them into a permanent mold. Um, we end up sometimes killing the connection. And sometimes the difficulty afterwards is recognizing it's actually like you deal with your own arrogance sometimes because you have to face the reality of how could I have been wrong, how could I have gotten this wrong, and that is a very difficult reality for some people to deal with, for most people to deal with, actually, which is where the struggle comes from. Um, that these connections are energetic. And sometimes what we do is we try to force energy into a bottle, which means we try to force it to have a shape that we are familiar with. Which is why sometimes in relationships, you can meet somebody and they can become your friend. And then we start adding all these rules. Because you're my friend, you should do this. You should call me more, or you should check on me more, or you should do this more, or you should do that more. Instead of just allowing the energetic connection to form what kind of relationship this was actually going to become, right? And we do that in all types of relationships. Dating relationships, especially, are notorious for this. You meet somebody, you like the person, you start spending time together, you start communicating, you start allowing the energetic connection to grow. And then what do? We try to fit it into a bottle. So we try to give it a shape that we're familiar with, and we start throwing all these rules at it, and we start throwing all of these things at it. And because we do that, excuse me, allergies, but because we start doing that, what we actually do is we start severing the connection, which is why they say if you're in a relationship and you break up, however long you were in that relationship, half of that time you actually were breaking up. Because the moment we start trying to force energy into a shape when energy has no shape, which is supposed to be what makes those relationships beautiful. We're actually supposed to allow them to manifest into something new, something original, something different. But we don't. We try to force it into something familiar, whether it be something familiar that we learned, something familiar that we were taught, or something familiar that we've experienced. And because of that, we actually start to sever the energetic connection. It is difficult to kind of have the que sera sera, what will be type approach when it comes to relationships, whether it be friendships or family or dating relationships. That is very difficult for us to do because we weren't taught to do it that way. We were taught that it is supposed to look like this. It is supposed to be like this. And because we were taught that, we try to force the unfamiliar into the familiar, which is what causes us sometimes to sever ties that may not have meant to have been severed. So my recommendation is fight the urge to force something into a bottle that was never meant to be there. Create something original that was only meant for you. Think about it like this. If you take, I love to cook. Love to cook. Everybody that knows me knows that. The most amazing, exciting thing about cooking, which is what makes it therapeutic for me, is how you can combine different spices and create a whole new experience. If you add something different, it creates a whole new experience. So why am I talking about spices and then relationships? Let me connect the two. If I add, let's say, oregano and basil, right? Well, what if I take away basil and instead of oregano and basil, maybe I use, let's say, oregano and thyme? I would have a whole different experience in my palate. And that's the whole point of those energetic connections. They're not meant to be familiar. They're not meant to be the same. They're meant to be original. And once people meet people and accept that, they end up having long-lasting relationships that are different and unique, that sometimes people on the outside can't understand. Why are you friends with that person? Why are you dating that person? How come you still talk to that family member? Because that relationship has a connection that is only unique to you. No one on the outside is supposed to understand. They're not meant to, because it's not their connection to understand. So, just wanted to throw that out there. Had this epiphany. I might actually write this down. This is pretty good stuff. I think I will. G. Lewis. Thoughts of a Grown Man. Walking Man's Road. Signing off.